Welcome to Smalltalk Daily for Friday, April 16th, 2010. This morning I thought I'd go through the little time tracker example that I mentioned in yesterday's screencast that I was inspired to do based on that longer screencast on web development that I saw a few days ago. And what I did is I started WebVelocity up. I got here, I created a new application, and to do that I just went back to the WebVelocity start here, new application. And I'm not going to go through this again, but what I did is I made sure schema was checked because I wanted to make sure this had a database application. So I go back here and I'll go to time tracker. This is the one I set up. And I had to configure a database, and I just put in my configuration information here. And once that's there, I can test the login, and sure enough it says database confirmed. I can go to the schema, and this is all I had to do to set things up. I'm going to go to the source code, and I had to create these two methods. I had to create a project table definition and a records table definition, and in records I set up the foreign key relationship so that each project has a record, or each record rather has a project, so each record is associated with some project, and that mapping is set up here. And once I did that, I went to the mappings part here, and under this unmapped tables I just went ahead down here and create class named. These are all tables that are already in the database, and it created these two classes, project and record. So project looks like this, and it has these things mapped over. Notice that it has this mapping already defined and figured out. So it got all that done. Now what I did is I went and did a couple of very tiny modifications. In project view UI I had to add a render actions on method. This is part of the framework, and I told it to add a button so that every time I'm editing a project I can decide to go ahead, or every time I'm viewing a project rather, I can decide to add a record. So as I select projects I can add records. And then in add record I had to add the code. It comes down here, summon the record edit UI, and if it comes back with a true, meaning it's like a dialog box in a regular GUI, if it came back as true, make that thing persistent, add it to the list of records I already have, and commit it to the database, and off it goes. And the only other things I really had to do is I had to go in here to project, and to make sure that things looked the way I wanted them to under source code, I added a print on method to have it, instead of putting the default Smalltalky thing of my class name, I told it to put out the project name. And likewise under record I did the same kind of thing. I added a print on there, and these are not required, these just make it look a little nicer. So to show you what that all looks like, and you see that the bulk of the code was those two methods over here. So let's go back to class project view UI, and this is all the real code I wrote. The other two were just prettifying things to make sure that instead of getting a Smalltalk class name in the UI, I got something more meaningful. This is all the code I ended up actually writing. The other stuff was database mapping. So I had to define the two tables, so that was two methods, and these other two methods. So a total of 4 methods, and I get here browse projects.html. I did this morning to make sure this was created, so I have a collection of records, start demo, so I can click on this one here, and I could add a new record. So let's go ahead and say add record, and I'll say finish demo, and we'll just leave whatever time is in there. And I spent, I don't know, let's say I spent 15 minutes on it, and that's the only thing I can associate it with, so I'll accept it. And sure enough, now I have 2 records, start demo, finish demo. And if I edit this, notice that I can edit my records. Now this is not the prettiest layout perhaps, but you notice that it does have some cognizance of things like the timestamp fields. So as I add records, I've got this kind of thing. It doesn't have a date chooser that's nicer than that, but I could add that with just taking a standard JavaScript widget and drop that in if I so desired. But it does come up with something relatively rational here. It has my picker for the months and then the time, because it's the timestamp, so it does pick all that up. And it looks fairly decent. If I wanted to change this, all I really need to do is get somebody that knows CSS and map that in. So as a quick proof of concept, that comes up pretty darn quick. Had to write all of 4 methods to do it, and it took me maybe 10-15 minutes to do, and that's mainly because I work with databases so rarely that I had to remind myself how the foreign key relationship was set up. If that's second nature to you, then you wouldn't have spent that 5 minutes I spent remembering that. Anyway, that's about it for today. Until next time, have fun with Smalltalk.